If you are a regular follower of Exploring Brain and Mind, you might know that I sometimes love to jump topics and that I'm not afraid to look at the more dark and possibly evenly fascinating aspects linked loosely or closely to brain and mind. And today is one of those episodes that I am looking again at relationships, connections, links between human behavior and the justice system, as in checking out what is criminal profiling and what is forensic psychology, as they can easily be mixed up in context, even though they are not the same thing. And because the episode goes into crime-related stuff, I am issuing the trigger warning again. Listen with caution, or maybe do not listen to this one if there is something that could trigger you. I don't want people ending up with flashbacks, PTSD, and the likes. To start the episode, let's look at a case from 2002 in the United States, and it's the case of the DC sniper. For 3 terrifying weeks, the Washington area was paralyzed as random people were shot and killed while pumping gas or petrol, mowing lawns, or just sitting on a bus. Law enforcement at the time called in the best minds to create a criminal profile. Based on patterns from past serial killers, the profile suggested the killer was likely a lone white male in a beat-up white van. The public was urged to look out for that white van. But the profile these minds have created was dead wrong. The killers turned out to be 2 men, John Allen Muhammad and Lee Boyd Malvo, an African-American man and a Caribbean teenager, operating out of a blue Chevrolet Caprice sedan. The case is a textbook example of the public fascination and sometimes failure of criminal profiling, but it also leads us to the critical, often misunderstood work of forensic psychology. Criminal profiling is an investigative tool focused on catching the unknown offender. Forensic psychology, on the other hand, is a rigorous scientific discipline focused on evaluating the known individual after they are caught, addressing questions like competency to stand trial or the mental state at the time of the crime, which were crucial for Malvo's defense. So we will now look at and explore what exactly criminal profiling and forensic psychology are, where their roles diverge, and how both fields are connected, sometimes uneasily, within the legal system. And to do this, let's start with a clearer definition of criminal profiling. Criminal profiling, also known as offender profiling or as criminal investigative analysis, is an investigative tool used by law enforcement to infer the likely characteristics, behavior, and psychological makeup of an unknown offender based on crime scene evidence, victimology, and behavioral patterns. And an analogy on offer would be, think of it like a sketch artist drawing a psychological portrait from behavioral clues instead of visual ones. Who does the criminal profiling? Typically, law enforcement officials or criminal investigative analysts are undertaking such tasks, and they are often from specialized units like the FBI's Behavioral Analysis Unit or similar international units. In the UK, criminal profiling is done by behavioral investigative advisors, and they're either specially trained staff in the police or they're part of the National Crime Agency. So they're investigators with specialized training. And the core goal of the criminal profilers is to narrow down an investigation and provide leads to help identify and apprehend a suspect. And there are different methods. One of them is inductive profiling, which uses accumulated statistical data and common patterns from past similar crimes or criminals to create a profile. For example, serial killers who exhibit this type of behavior tend to be males aged 25 to 35. And there is also the method of deductive profiling, which is behavioral evidence analysis. That focuses solely on the detailed analysis of the specific crime scene evidence to infer the motivations and characteristics of the offender involved in that particular crime. Criminal profiling is often criticized for a lack of consistent empirical validation and can be subjective, which is why its admissibility in court as direct evidence is highly limited. Next, let's look at what is forensic psychology. And the definition is that forensic psychology is a recognized specialty within psychology that applies the science and profession of psychology to questions and issues relating to law and the legal system. A good analogy for that would be it's the bridge between the mind and the courthouse. Who are forensic psychologists? Who provides forensic psychology services? A forensic psychologist is a licensed psychologist, typically with a doctoral degree or a specialized master's degree. And it's a psychologist who has specialized training in law and legal procedures. They must adhere to strict ethical and scientific standards like the APA, which is the American Psychological Association. The core goal of forensic psychologists is to provide objective, evidence-based psychological expertise to the court or legal parties on a specific legal question related to an identified individual. And forensic psychologists' scope of work is broader than the profiling ones. The expertise of forensic psychologists can be required in criminal cases to assess the competency to stand trial. It's to assess the defendant's current mental capacity to understand the charges and assist their attorney or lawyer. Forensic psychologists can also be asked to comment on the criminal responsibility, as in the insanity defense. They have to evaluate the defendant's mental state at the time of the offense, which in legal jargon is often called the mens rea or the guilty mind. Forensic psychologists could be asked to undertake a risk assessment, as in determining the likelihood of an offender reoffending, which is called recidivism, for sentencing or parole. It's not just the criminal cases that forensic psychologists might be asked to assist. In civil cases, for example, in child custody evaluations, personal injury claims when it comes to psychological damages, or in fitness for duty evaluations, they might be asked to assist. And they might also be asked for an expert witness testimony, as in presenting assessment findings and psychological concepts to judges and juries. Let's look at a few more direct comparisons in how criminal profiling and forensic psychology differ. For example, looking at the primary goal, the criminal profiling's primary goal is to aid in investigation when it comes to apprehending an unknown offender. And the primary goal in forensic psychology is to aid in adjudication, as in answering legal questions about an identified individual. When it comes to methodology, criminal profiling primarily investigates analysis of crime scenes and patterns with a less established scientific backing, and methodology in forensic psychology is primarily clinical assessment gained from interviews or psychological tests and application of evidence-based psychological principles. The focus of criminal profiling is inferring traits of a generalized unknown offender, while the focus of forensic psychology is assessing the psychological state of a specific known individual, and that could be a defendant, a victim, or a witness. And as for the role in law, the criminal profiling is an investigative tool for law enforcement, rarely admissible as direct evidence, while the forensic psychology and its role in law is that it's a formally recognized psychological specialty that often provides expert witness testimony. So how do criminal profiling and forensic psychology connect in legal matters? While they are distinct, the fields can and do interact, and they are conceptually linked. Number one, they have a shared knowledge base. Both draw upon an understanding of abnormal psychology, criminology, and criminal behavior patterns. The theories and research of criminal psychologists inform forensic work, and the whole thing is really a broader academic field that's encompassing profiling. Secondly, profiling as an investigative process is often the first step in a high-profile case. It helps investigators identify who they should look for. Number 3 is that forensic assessment follows apprehension once a suspect is identified and arrested, which could partially be based on using the profile. The legal questions shift. This is when the forensic psychologist steps in to perform formal evaluation. For example, checking if an offender is competent to stand trial, to assess the mental state at the time of the crime, and sometimes also the general mental state. And the findings of the forensic psychologists are admissible in court. And number 4 is the influence on the case strategy. For the prosecution, a forensic psychologist might use their expertise to challenge a defense's claim of insanity or to conduct a risk assessment for sentencing. For the defense, a forensic psychologist might testify about factors like eyewitness reliability, the psychological impact of a trauma, which might influence the behavior, or the client's competency. So the big picture is that profiling is about solving the crime and forensic psychology is about ensuring the fair and informal application of the law once an alleged perpetrator is in the justice system. To summarize all this, profiling is a law enforcement investigative technique focused on the who done it, while forensic psychology is a scientific discipline focused on the psychological factors relevant to the why and how of legal questions concerning known individuals. Both disciplines may be different, but they strive to bring a deeper understanding of human behavior to the pursuit of justice. And that concludes today's episode of Exploring Brain and Mind. Share the episode with people who may be interested. And if you're not already doing so, please do follow and subscribe to the podcast on Apple, on Spotify, on Amazon Music or YouTube, and tune in again next time.